Welcome to the Authority File. I'm Bill Mickey, your host and the editorial director at Choice. We're back with another series, and before we get started, I'm extremely excited to share that the Authority File is now an award-winning podcast. That's right, we were named Best B2B Podcast at the 2023 Publisher Podcast Awards. We'll link to it in the show notes for this episode, and you can also check it out at publisherpodcastawards.com. Many thanks to Media Voices, the producer of the event, for the recognition, and of course to the amazing team here at Choice. In this 4-part series, which is brought to you with support from Rittenhouse Book Distributors, I'm joined by Nicole Gallo, Executive Vice President at Rittenhouse, a privately held distributor of titles in the health sciences. We've examined quite a bit of DEI-related collection development topics on this podcast, and I'm glad to have Nicole on the program because we haven't yet heard a distributor's approach to DEI priorities. Distributors, of course, occupy a position between the publisher and the library customer, and Rittenhouse has taken a very proactive approach to shifting its collection management practices to ensure DEI remains at the forefront of the health sciences market. In this second episode, we talk about the unique perspective the company has on the market and what it sees as opportunities and challenges for publishers and libraries as they incorporate DEI practices. Okay, so from your perspective, what have been the pain points, if any, for libraries, publishers, and distributors, in incorporating DEI practices into, the system and operations?
Yeah, we're probably going to sit here for a few minutes because there's no easy answer.
Right.
In thinking about this, I really started to think about health sciences and how disparities in healthcare is really the foundation for what most of our publishing partners are thinking about now with DEI initiatives.
Hmm.
So, disparity is impacting all aspects of healthcare, and it really is changing the way that healthcare is accessed, the way that health sciences programs are taught,
Mm-hmm.
and the way that the population can expect to be cared for. And it's across all aspects of health sciences. So, making sure that DEI is not just one topic and then we move on, it's integrated. And I think
Right.
we're seeing that across all of these different pain points for our publishers, for our customers. It's really complicated, and that's why we're having this podcast.
Right. Exactly.
But the libraries, and it's really interesting because I did some surveying, and by I mean our team, our sales team. One of the biggest pain points for our library partners is access to the right content and having the budget to purchase that content.
Mm.
Right. So there's a big demand for DEI collections or access to that information, but budgets are stagnant or declining.
Hmm.
And so the libraries really struggle with how can they meet their academic institutions who have really been leading the introduction of DEI initiatives in teaching curricula that integrates it,
Right.
and how can they ensure best practices can be met and implemented across the institution. How can the library meet these trends and get those resources on limited time, limited budget? So I think for the library, that's the biggest pain point. I mean, they're, librarians, as you know, they understand DEI initiatives. It's their life's mission to, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
To supply information and access to information equally,
Mm-hmm.
and to make sure that it's accessible and to make sure that it's available. But someone has to pay for it. And so I think that's the challenge often, that they would buy everything they could get their fingers on if they could afford it, whether it was a journal, whether it was a book, a video. A lot of buzz from the libraries about wanting different formats
Yeah.
for DEI.
Mm-hmm.
So from the library's perspective, that's the biggest challenge. From our publishers' perspectives, I think their biggest challenge is to flip the editorial process. So they now have to find editors who are experts in the field of DEI so that they can in turn find authorship and engage them in weaving DEI into their publications.
Mm.
So I think that's been the biggest shift for our publishing partners. And then, of course, speeding up the time to publication. It's always been a challenge. We can't sit here and wait 3 years, 4 years for some important information on DEI.
Mm.
And of course, you turn on the TV and it's on the news today, and you want to get that information today. So
Right.
the publishers have been challenged with how do they speed up time to market.
Mm.
And then for us, the challenge is, making sure that we understand what the library's pain point is, what the publisher's pain point is, and we recognize the trends, and we then can create a service that will bring all of those things together. So, you know, what's the demand? What's the availability? And then how can we fit in there and make it as affordable as possible? And make sure that our customers have access to that information. So we are uniquely situated as a distributor because we have visibility to all of these things.
Mm. Yeah, and it's encouraging to hear how you describe the company as being so perceptive in in the way its two customer bases are
Hmm.
for their needs, essentially,
Right.
and then trying to work with both to accommodate them. And related to that, you mentioned that there's this need to get for speed to market, and
Hmm.
I'm wondering how Rittenhouse might be. If at all, like adjusting its own operation to kind of um,
Yes.
support that and accelerate its own ability to bring content to from publishers to librarians.
Yes. And this also ties back to the budget question. So
Mm.
we have completely flipped our data flow processes over the past 10, 15 years. And I've been here through all this, so I can speak to it. It used to be we would receive a book in the warehouse, we would
Hmm.
catalog that book, we had a cataloger just like the libraries did,
Yeah.
and then we'd make it available for sale. And so it wasn't until the physical product hit our warehouse. Now that there's so many issues with that, we could talk all day about that. But if we didn't order it, if the publisher didn't send it, it essentially didn't exist. Now we work well in advance of publication dates. So we take data feeds, and we organize our data, and we use bisect codes, and also just general topics, medicine, nursing, allied health, and then segments within that. But we feed our database well in advance. When
Mm.
we are onboarding a new publisher, we tell them we want at least 6 months notice for new publication. And why that's so important is because the library is forecasting how they're going to spend their budget.
Right.
They also want to understand, and this has been our biggest challenge as we've entered the world of digital aggregation. They can't buy print and digital the same book oftentimes because their budgets won't allow for it.
Right.
Digital also gives much wider reach.
Hmm.
So they want to know when they're considering a purchase, is this available in print and digital? Where should I allocate my funds? What's the pricing look like? All of those things. So we really have impressed upon our publishing partners the importance of having that data available well in advance. You know, in years past, they wouldn't have fixed a price to the book until it came in a box from their warehouse where they had it printed. Those things don't happen anymore. So we work with them, and sometimes you have a publisher who again, they're not a commercial publisher, so they're not publishing in the same way that some of the big commercial publishers are. So we have to kind of explain to them, in this marketplace, if you want to have reach, this is how you have to approach your publication information.
Hmm.
So we talk later about data a lot, but I think that we have, as an aggregator, really worked to listen to our customer and how they need to buy, and why it's really important to have access to that information, and then push the publisher.
Yeah.
The other thing I'll say there is that with digital, it eases the wait for, you know, time to market. So if we can get that
Yeah.
publisher, the publishers used to have an editor, get an editor, the editor would have the publisher write a book, the book would be published, then they'd go back and say, well, how can we get it into a digital format? And then they would take the PDF and process it. Now publishing is just making information available.
Yep.
And then whatever the output is, you can take that file and you can output it. So oftentimes we will have access to the digital product well before the print product comes to market, which is great. And it really shortens that window.
Excellent. Okay, thank you for that. Um, just kind of going back to the publisher side of the business, I'm wondering how, what else you're seeing in terms of how they're aligning, their production to
Hmm.
establish, DEI principles and
Yeah.
policies.
Really interesting. And, I took a little bit of a deep dive into this, and we could have a whole podcast just on this.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Almost every publisher now is following guidelines from the associations that inform their product development, right?
Hmm.
So there are DEI initiatives woven into these guidelines. People like the American Psychological Association, they're publishing, inclusive language guidelines. The AMA has really come out and said that, racism is a crisis and is, a disease.
Hmm.
And they're, putting guidelines around how to address that. They have a guide to language. The NIH publishes an annual report, and really it's for government institutions, but it's freely available on their website. They have this report, MID 715, and that really gives guidelines on how to integrate DEI initiatives into the everyday. And so the publishing partners are, you know, paying attention.
Right.
And, one of our largest partners, Springer Publishing, they make every effort to now have diverse illustrations, videos, and it's, weaved in and out throughout all of the content. And all of our publishing partners now hold, podcast sessions, informational webinars, editorial boards that are readily and openly available. Walters Kluwer recently, broadcast a DEI webinar, and it was on their social media feed.
Hmm.
So, the publishing partners are really working to comply with these guidelines. And, they are also trying to assemble teams, editorially, authorship, you know, across the publishing house that are more diverse.
Right.
Because what happens, and especially in healthcare, if you have, a lot of our publishing partners have physicians, nurses who are authors, who are informing the editorial focus of their content. If you have a more diverse authorship, it's naturally going to find its way into the books. So the publishing partners are paying attention. And as I said, at the start of this, they have been for quite some time.
Right.
Um, and the other side of that is if they don't do it, they get hit over the head about
Hmm.
it, right?
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
so they have to be very conscious of it. The other thing that, DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, but there's also accessibility
Yep.
that really falls into, it's really DEIA, right? So you have that accessibility aspect and making sure that the content is available in different formats, is accessible. The publishers are really paying attention to that as well.
Okay.
Some states won't even buy it if it's not. So, the rules and laws
Hmm.
are kind of dictating how they make content available. So it's really interesting. It used to be a nice to do, but now it's a must do,
Must. Yeah.
with regards to the content. So it's been really interesting to watch how the guidelines have evolved, and then how the publishing partners are paying attention to that.
Yeah, excellent. And then likewise, how are you seeing this playing out in the academic library world? I mean, how are these issues kind of trickling up
Hmm.
from their end? Are they, you
Yeah.
know, sort of reacting to what's being taught, the curriculum, or are they sort of coming at it from a collection development thing, or all of the above?
I mean, I think that I mentioned it earlier, librarians in and of their nature, are immersed in, diverse and equal, equality issues. I mean,
Hmm.
but really, you can't step foot on an academic campus without hearing about it, seeing a course being taught on, DEI initiatives. A lot of the universities put out their own guidelines And they have initiatives, task forces, courses, whole divisions really focused on DEI in academia. So, almost all of our library partners are involved in
Mm-hmm.
these initiatives on campus. Um, Not only that, they're getting the guidelines from, they're hearing from the, institutions like yourselves, the ALA, ACRL, the Medical Library Association. They are all putting forth statements and guidelines that the librarians pay attention to,
Mm-hmm.
go to sessions on when they're at meetings, or dial into something like this and hear about it. So it, it's not a trend, I think, for the librarian. I think it has been there. It has been woven into their day-to-day operation. And yes, they have to react to that trend because now their patrons are demanding it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and you turn on the news, and then you go to the library to see how you can read up on something. So they are well aware of that, but I don't think it's a trendy collection development initiative for the library.
Mm-hmm.
And it's here to stay for sure,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And the whole idea that it's a topic, it really has to be interwoven into every part of their collection development. So, it's interesting. There was an article published by Science Direct, the Journal for Academic Librarianship, and they surveyed librarians on DEI and how they felt about it on their individual campuses. And it was really interesting that librarians in general only somewhat feel that their institutions and their libraries promote a DEI culture. So, yeah,
Wow.
and it was eye-opening. And
Yeah.
I should mention, where Rittenhouse is I'm going to have links to all these things I'm referencing in a document on our website. So if you want to go and read more about it, we'll have that available. Really, and it's, a freely available article. So, most academic campuses, and especially those that support health sciences, they do have task forces, courses, and departments that are trying to change that.
Mm-hmm.
And they're trying to make meaningful progress for diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility. So it's in progress, I guess, is the best way to answer that. The academic library has to be part of the conversation. So, increasingly, they have a liaison to that department or to that course who has to be involved in the decision making process with regards to education, content, training. The librarians are collaborating, in most cases on campus for these types of initiatives. A lot, I went out and I was, just bouncing around some of our customers' websites. Most of them have a LibGuide for
Mm-hmm.
DEI.
Yep.
And so, you can get in and see what they're doing and what their collection development is. So, they're happy, librarians are happy that information about DEI publications are more readily available. They're very happy that people like Rittenhouse are curating collections to make it easier to find. And one of the big considerations for a library is, is DEI just encouraged or is it enforced?
Mm-hmm.
And, that came out of conversations with some of our customers, and, how do they navigate that? And again, it shouldn't, but at the end of the day, it comes back to their budgets. What
Yep.
can they afford to do? How can they do it?
Mm-hmm.
Can they find open access resources?
Right.
So they can build a collection, they can purchase some resources, integrate open access resources. So there's a lot going on. And the libraries are really in the middle of it, right? They're the access point for information on campus. So, they have to be, and they have to be paying attention. So
Right.
it really is, at the forefront, I think, of how they collect across all their resources.
You just heard from Nicole Gallo, Executive Vice President at Rittenhouse Book Distributors. This series is brought to you with support from Rittenhouse. Join us next week as we discuss how Rittenhouse has executed on its editorial and collection management priorities, how it has built services that enhance the buying experience for libraries, and what the company has learned since launching its DEI collection. As always, underwriting opportunities for the Authority File podcast are directed by Choice's advertising director, Pam Marino, And all of our episodes are produced and edited by Choice's digital media producer, Sabrina Kofer, with support from digital media assistant Ashley Roy. That's all for this week. Thanks for joining us.